Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the railway. Today I've got another unboxing for you which is quite interesting. It's one that I've had for quite some time now, but I've never actually decided to review it. I've got another one that's very similar to it, which I have unboxed and reviewed in the past. And of course what I'm talking about there is the Royal Scot, which you can see out on the line. But before we get on with it, I've just got a little news flash regarding some of the videos in December. I'm going to be doing, we can call it another series if you like, of the running videos because they're a lot of fun. I don't know exactly when they're going to start, but I'll tell you that in the next video. But it's going to be 4 new themed running videos. So if you liked those, I hope you'll enjoy those. I've got 4 new themes coming out, so keep an eye out for those in December. But no, this one, as I'll show you now, is this. It's another Mainline loco, as you can probably tell from the title. But yeah, it's one of the Mainline rebuilt Patriot class locomotives. And they're a very, very interesting class of locomotive. Very similar to the Royal Scot actually, which is of course why she's on the other line. But I thought this would be a nice one to review today. So yeah, that should be good fun. I bought this one from Scotland a long time ago. It was actually from a toy museum up in Callander, which is in the Trossachs. And that toy museum has a shop, a little toy shop, with loads of model railway items at the time, and this was a few years back, and this was one of them, and I thought, well, I've not got a Patriot, so why on earth not? And I also bought a few coaches from him as well. But yeah, if you're ever up in the Trossachs, go and check out the toy museum in Callander because it's well worth a look, and especially if you like all the Triang stuff, they've got fantastic Triang layouts there with all sorts of rare locomotives in mint condition, so yeah, very nice to see. So anyway, we'll get this unboxed then. I've got a lot of information to tell you about the Patriot class, but I'd rather do that once we're up onto the white background, so I'll do that now. So let's get the box open. I suppose I'll show you the end of it actually before I do that, but someone has blobbed a nasty price tag on there. £60. I actually paid about £50 for it I think, but you know, never mind. Anyway, so yeah, 460 7p rebuilt Patriot locomotive, BR green. Now it says on the locomotive that it's actually a 6p, and in my research, you know, in my book, it also says 6p, so perhaps the box was wrong, or perhaps it's the wrong box, I even thought at one point. But everything else seems to be right, and of course it is. There's only one sort of rebuilt Patriot, so I don't know, it can't be wrong, but must have just been a mistake. So yeah, let's get it out now, without further ado. And they are, you know, really good locos these. If you service them, which I always say, you have to service them because they can run very badly, these Mainline locos. And they do have the sort of Ringfield style motor in there with all the gears and, you know, the sort of flat faced armature. But it's not a problem, you know, they run very nicely, for me at least. I don't have an awful lot of them, I think I've got 4. But yeah, this is one of 2 460s. So let's take the tender out first. It's in quite an odd livery, isn't it? It's not really a Brunswick green, it's more of a, I don't know, it's actually more of a southern green, but not quite, is it? It's a bit strange. Perhaps one of you will be able to tell me the exact name of the livery if it has one. So yeah, there's the tender with the British Railways written on it. It hasn't got the crest, you'll notice, which is quite interesting. Alright, so let's get the locomotive out then. I'm not a huge fan of this packaging for obvious reasons. There's no holes on the underside, so you've really just got to sort of claw at it and hope you don't break something. But these Mainline models are normally built to quite a high standard, and it's very difficult to break things off. Perhaps with the exception of the handrails, which are a little bit, let's say, delicate. But yeah, let's get the packaging out of the way, and there she is. Very, very lovely locomotive, in a very nice livery too, as I'm sure you can tell. But of course you can't see it too well down here, so like I said, let's get her up onto the white background as always, and let's do a little overview of her. Alright, so there she is then, looking absolutely gorgeous up against my white background. And as promised, I've got you a little bit of information about the class. So sit back, enjoy, and I'll get started. So this is one of 7 of the original Patriot locomotives to be rebuilt, and they did that between 1946 and 1949. The original Patriots, though, were built in 1930 for the LMS by Fowler, Henry Fowler, of course, the famous designer. And they ended up as basically smaller versions of the Royal Scots, apparently, which is quite interesting, and it's quite fitting then that I've got a Royal Scot on the other line. They were built at Crewe and at Derby, but they weren't named Patriot, apparently, until 1937. That was done after the L&ER locomotive that was named Patriot was withdrawn. And quite interestingly, during the BR period, 34 of the Patriots, the original Patriots, remained unrebuilt, and I'm not sure entirely what happened to them after that. but at least this is one of the rebuilt ones. So that's a little bit of info for you. Let's have a go at a bit of a review then. We'll start with the Locomotive. And as we always seem to notice with these mainline locos, given their age, they're certainly very well detailed. And they're quite obviously a lot more detailed than, you know, the Hornby examples that were coming out around the same time. And you can see that already. You know, the Hornby examples from the time didn't have all these separately fitted parts. I mean, look at the handrails, the various piping. There's all sorts of moulded detail under the boiler. I mean, look at those. They're quite finely moulded, aren't they, those separate parts around the boiler. Annoyingly, though, the safety valves and the whistle, it looks like a horn there actually, are quite plasticky, and it is quite obvious that they're plastic. But it's not a massive issue, you know. Once you get more than, say, a foot away, or perhaps less with my bad eyesight, it really doesn't look like they are plastic. But certainly up close like this, it is fairly obvious. But you know, once you get up and running, hopefully you won't notice it, and it won't be something that it niggles you like it niggled me when I first noticed it. But the whole thing is really quite well riveted, isn't it? Especially around the end of the boiler. I mean, look at all those rivets. It just looks so realistic, doesn't it? And I really like the matte black there. Of course, we'll talk more about the livery later, but the matte black on the end of the boiler there just looks absolutely fantastic. And those rivets just look brilliantly realistic, don't they? They really do. So yeah, let's take a look at the livery then, now I've started to mention it. Of course, you've got this sort of green, which I'm not too sure how to describe the green. It is quite close to some of the SR green, isn't it? But it's again, it's not quite. And I don't know if, you know, this camera's picking it up. I suppose it's a little bit darker than what the camera sees. You'll probably get a feel of that once she gets running. But yeah, it's quite unusual. But either way, you've got the nice sort of reddy, orangey stripes which go around the boiler, which are very nice indeed. And of course, you've got the red stripe, which starts right at the front buffer beam, goes all the way back. Doesn't really carry on to the tender, but the tender has got its own sort of red and grey border, which sort of surrounds the British Railways text. But we'll look at the tender in a little more detail later on. Let's take a look at the cab then and all that surrounds it. The cab roof is very well riveted, as is the Royal Scot actually. I think I must have picked up on that. But it really does look great, doesn't it, the cab roof? And on the side there, you've got the running number, which is 45540, and 6p underneath there. Again, a very well riveted area with that red and grey border around the number, which I think looks very smart indeed. And even around the windows, you know, they're not glazed, but they are quite well, you know, detailed. There's sort of like a handrail that goes in between them there, if that's what it is. But it's a bit of moulding that just makes it look a little bit more than just a piece of plastic, which is exactly what you want. Let's take a quick look inside the cab. Now the cab is very well detailed, but it's not painted, so that normally seems to lose all merit with most people, and I suppose it does with me really. But at least it is very well detailed, and if you did have the skill, which I don't, to paint it, you could do. And I'm fairly sure it would look pretty good if you did that. And of course the motion is really nicely done, you know, all the linkage and all the valve gear and such. You'll see it better a little bit later on when we get her running. But it does look very smart, doesn't it? And the mainline stuff always does. It's always very fine. And of course these are loco driven, not tender driven. So it's all the more impressive when you see that running. Let's head around to the front then and see what we've got down there. Most obviously the handrail that's on the smoke box door is a slightly different colour. It's more of a silvery colour, which helps to contrast with the black, I suppose, on the background. You've also got the running number on the front, which is quite common with the mainline variety, which is 45540, as already noted. And also you've got 9A, which I suppose could be something to do with the route availability or that sort of thing, you know, some sort of classification. And I think that says 9A as far as I can tell. And of course the smoke box door is generally quite well detailed. There's plenty of rivets, and it looks pretty smart and pretty realistic, which is really all you can ask for. And then looking down a little bit further, they're not lamp irons, are they? But they're sort of moulded pieces, which are very fine, and I'm surprised they haven't broken. Again, it's a nice detail. Down even further then, we've got the buffer beam. Fairly well riveted with some nice, well, they appear to be turned metal actually. They might be plastic, but they look realistic, which is the point. So that's all that matters. And you've got a fairly well detailed buffer beam with the rivets, of course, and the pre-fitted vacuum pipe and the coupling hook, which is very nice. So that's that. There's some steps at the front as well there, as you can probably tell, which again are quite delicate looking, but I can't say that I've ever broken any, so they must be fairly robust, which is pretty nice. Let's take a look at the name badge then. I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but the name of the locomotive, of course, is Sir Robert Turnbull, and it's printed there on a little nameplate above the front wheel arch, which I suppose is unusual. but it's closer to the middle than the second one, I suppose. But yeah, Sir Robert Turnbull, very nicely printed, same on the other side of course, and it looks pretty nice. So I hope that's a good overview of the Locomotive. Hopefully you've seen her features and I've not droned on about it for too long. Let's take a quick look at the tender then. And the first thing that hits you when you look at the tender is, goodness gracious, look at all the rivets. I mean, modern tenders from modern locos probably won't be able to match the number of rivets on here. I mean, look at it, there's hundreds. And it just brings out that texture, doesn't it? You can really believe that it's pieces of metal which have been riveted together to make this marvellous machine, which is absolutely fantastic. You can tell also that the handrails are separately fitted because they come out of little holes in the plastic. Hopefully you can see that there. But that's always great, you know, when they separately fit parts. It does really help to make it look like it's, well, real, rather than just bits of plastic glued together. Let's take a look at the undercarriage. As you can see, it's reasonably realistic. It's well moulded. Most of it's moulded, not separately fitted, as is the norm. But there is a fair bit of you know, suspension detail there with all the springs and axle boxes and whatnot. And a feature I do like is the fact that the steps seem to be sort of a little bit further forward than the undercarriage, which is not always done. Hopefully my shots here will show you that. But again, it helps to add a bit more of a three-dimensional feel to it, which is of course what you always like. Before we look at the back of the tender then, let's take a look at the top. The coal isn't bad at all. Of course it's a little bit out of scale, I notice. It's pretty chunky, isn't it? So you get a bit of a railroad flavour when you look at that coal. Having said that, it's a nice colour, well, black. I didn't mean that. It's a nice finish. You know, it's quite matted and it looks almost a bit dusty, doesn't it, somehow? I don't know, but that's not just because I don't take care of it. You know, it's all been dusted over before I've done this review. So that's pretty much what it would have looked like. Behind there then you've got the sort of water end, which again is fairly well detailed with rivets and, well, possibly some separately fitted parts there as well, as you can see. Okay, round to the back then, the last part. Again, it's the same story, plenty of rivets, no printed detail there. There are a few badges there which look like if they were backmen perhaps they would have been printed on, but that's not a huge issue. You've got a very nice vacuum pipe there, and obviously by nice I mean fairly well detailed, you know, nicely moulded there. And of course you've got a very similar buffer beam underneath there with lots of rivets, the same buffers, and another coupling hook if you'd like it. Well, if you'd like to use it, if you're one of those. Personally I don't have a steady enough hand, but there's plenty out there who do. Alright, so that's the Locomotive. Apologies if I've missed anything striking, but I am eager to get this one down onto the railway now and show you her in motion, and of course have a little bit of a running session with the Royal Scot, who is raring to go. So let's get her down onto the railway right now then, and see how she performs. Let's give it a try. Okay, so there she is, Sir Robert Turnbull, which sounds strange calling it a she. Number 45540, looking gorgeous on the railway, and I'll just show you what she's going to be pulling. Obviously she's not coupled to them yet. I'm going to do that in a second on camera for you. But I've sort of gone with a bit of a mishmash again. As you might know, I do like to do that from time to time. So I've taken coaches from 3 different sets. The first off is sort of the, they're not blood and custard, they're sort of orange and red coaches. 2 of those, corridor coaches, very nice. And behind that, these are the blood and custard coaches, the Gresley coaches, which look absolutely gorgeous. I love those. 2 of those. And then at the back, including one of the brakes, is the little LMS coaches. One of them just a regular corridor coach and the other one a brake. So that's 6 in all, which is a nice load for her, and that shouldn't be too much of a struggle. On the other line then, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, we've got number 46100, which is the Royal Scot, looking gorgeous. Very similar loco to the Patriot, but of course this time she's got the Pullman coaches all coupled up to her ready. And as you can see on the back end there, I've got the Wren coach, which quite interestingly also came from that toy shop in Scotland, which is you know, a nice thing to run as well. So I've put that on, as I sometimes do, which should make the rake of Pullmans a little bit longer and possibly a little bit more interesting. Okay, so let's do a little bit of forwards and backwards movement then with the Patriot at slow speed. Now I will warn you, these motors aren't particularly high torque, so they're not great at slow speeds. But nevertheless, I will try to show you, but when she runs, we'll have to get her up to a decent speed so that she's happy pulling the coaches. Alright, let's move the camera then and get a bit of her moving. So let's apply a touch of power, forwards first. Going to be a bit jolty because she's been sat still for the whole review, but see what I mean? She'll do it, but it's just a little bit jumpy. Let's send her into reverse, bring her back. Oh yes, a little bit smoother in reverse. Alright, forwards once more then, a bit faster. See, it's a bit more manageable at that speed. And then let's bring her back onto the coaches then. Whoa, a bit fast, but she's alright. Okay, let's bring her back into shot then. There you go, look at that motion. Gorgeous. Okay, I think she's raring to go, so let's give her a little bit of power and get her going. And then we'll head round the other side of the layout and start the Royal Scot, and then we'll watch them go together and see if we have any accidents. Fingers crossed not. Okay, here we go. Nice and gently does it. They're very good pullers, these are. There we go, a little bit more juice. Get those coaches off. Okay, nice. Right, over to the Royal Scot then. And again, she is a similarly good runner, perhaps slightly even better. But let's give her a little bit of juice then and see how she gets on. And I always seem to find that the mainline locos have a very distinctive sound to them. And you can always tell when it's a mainline loco, can't you? It's just that sort of mechanical buzz. And here's Rob. That's a good speed. Looks good. And I do love that Royal Scot as well, she looks great. Run her quite often this year, I suppose, compared to others. Okay everybody, well I think that's about all I've got to show you today. Hopefully you've enjoyed seeing the two 460s. Mainline certainly did make a good 460 and I do enjoy running these, so hopefully you enjoyed seeing them as well. Of course, if you did enjoy the video, please feel free to go and check out the Facebook and Twitter pages, because I'm always posting various extra content on there, you know, various projects, pictures, posts, whatever you want. So if that's something that interests you, please go and check those out, because it's nice to get into discussions on there. And they are facebook.com/samstrains and twitter.com/samstrains. And if you like, I'll see you on there. But if not, thank you very much everybody. Nice to have your company as always, and I'll see you next time. Take care everybody, see you soon.